Let's jump right into this, guys. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking a truly terrifying case study. This isn't just your standard story about things going bump in the night. It's this incredibly complex narrative that blends ancient, deeply rooted mythology with the devastating real-world consequences of a completely fractured family. We're going to break down the anatomy of a possession, step by step, and examine how psychological vulnerabilities can, theoretically at least, open the front door to unimaginable darkness. But before we get into the exact timeline of this chilling story, we've got to ask ourselves a fundamental question. How does a bright, super capable chemical engineering student named Mohit become a vessel for something so dark? As you'll see as we go through this explainer, the supernatural elements and the human elements are just unbelievably intertwined here. It really forces us to ask what actually happens when a father's massive ego collides head-on with a son's unchecked, volatile anger.
Section 1. The Brahmrakshas Legend. So to understand exactly what happened to Mohit, we first need to identify the extremely specific, terrifying entity that supposedly hijacked his life. And what's truly alarming about this entity is that it is definitely not your average ghost. According to the source material, a Brahmrakshas is the corrupted spirit of a highly educated scholar. We're talking about an entity that has actually memorized ancient scriptures, but died with immense pride and ego. It's highly intelligent, totally manipulative, speaks fluent Sanskrit, and is known for its extreme stubbornness. Basically, once this thing latches on, it absolutely refuses to let go.
Section 2. A fractured family dynamic.
You see, the haunting didn't just start in a vacuum. It actually began with a family dynamic that was deeply, deeply broken, long before any paranormal activity ever kicked off. This dynamic sets up a catastrophic clash between two incredibly toxic personalities. On one side, you have the father's massive ego. He was emotionally distant, eventually cutting off all communication and just flat out refusing to even visit his son's college. On the flip side, you have Mohit's volatile anger. He had these violent tendencies and a super rebellious nature. In fact, he was getting into so many fights at college that out of sheer fear and disconnection, he actually hired a fake father to meet with the college administration just to cover up his behavior. This clash completely shattered Mohit's protective emotional aura.
So the core issue here is that negative entities are drawn to negative energy. It's like a magnet. The combination of the father's absolute refusal to forgive his son's missteps, along with Mohit's resulting deep emotional isolation, created the absolute perfect negative hotspot. Mohit was left totally without a support system, carrying all this immense anger and fear. And according to the lore, that made him the perfect, prime target for a parasitic spirit.
Section 3. Horror in the Hostel.
Okay, now let's examine the terrifying sequence of events that unfolded when Mohit was left completely alone in his college hostel during a holiday. Notice the terrifying, almost military-like discipline of this entity's timeline. Every single night, right at 12 a.m., the entity would arrive and just stand right outside Mohit's door. For over an hour, it would remain perfectly still while Mohit hid in absolute terror inside his bathroom, literally stuffing clothes into his own mouth so his breathing wouldn't be heard. Then, precisely around 1:30 a.m., it would finally leave. It returned at that exact same time every single night, just slowly and methodically breaking Mohit's psyche.
Eventually, Mohit reached a breaking point. A friend advised him to just stand up to the fear, so he thought he could bravely yell at the entity to go away. He cursed at it right from the bathroom. But man, this desperate attempt to fight back backfired entirely. The spirit didn't flee. Instead, it escalated the violence instantly. It bypassed the locked doors, entered his room, telekinetically threw his keys up in the air, and slapped Mohit with such immense force that he was knocked completely unconscious. He woke up the next day, completely bruised, broken, and with shattered glasses.
Now, right before that physical attack, there was a moment of pure psychological torture. Just think about this quote from the source. The bathroom lights started flashing in a specific sequence. Tack, 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 tack. It was playing with him, sending a message. This detail is absolutely chilling because it shows the entity wasn't just some mindless ball of energy. It was highly intelligent, completely calculated, and actively mocking his fear. It was letting him know, without a doubt, that it had complete control.
Section 4. The Demon Comes Home.
So years pass. Mohit actually manages to finish his doctorate in Singapore. But during the pandemic, he returns home and he brings the darkness straight into his family's living room. When these bizarre symptoms began to manifest, it became undeniably clear that this was no longer a simple psychological breakdown.
Mohit began emitting this foul odor, resembling dead fish. He would lock himself away, chanting complex Sanskrit shlokas at incredibly high speeds. His sister even caught him in the pitch-dark kitchen, just drinking raw refined cooking oil directly from the pouches. He tied T-shirts around his neck that were heavily blackened with scooter grease, and he would give these unblinking, intense stares that just deeply terrified his brother-in-law. I mean, this was a full-blown spiritual hijacking.
And watch how this builds into something even more dangerous. The entity didn't just act erratically, it actively plotted. This step-by-step plotting proves just how cunning a Brahmarakshish really is. Step 1. It spilled refined oil near the mother's bed in the dark, causing her to slip and severely injure herself, all while Mohit just laughed from his room. Step 2. It secretly poisoned the food of the uncle and brother-in-law. These were the two men who might have physically challenged him, and it sent them straight to the hospital with severe food poisoning. Step 3. With the protectors out of the way, it strategically isolated the remaining vulnerable targets, his sister and her 1-year-old baby. It even went as far as threatening to throw the baby off the roof.
And honestly, the psychological warfare was just as sharp as the physical threats. Look at this quote from Mohit speaking to his parents. "Even if you die a dog's death from hunger, I won't let a single penny of my earnings go down your throat." When you hear vicious words like this coming from a son, especially one who has a doctorate and the full ability to work, you realize the entity is actively weaponizing the family's past resentments against them. It's literally using the father's past financial control and emotional distance as a knife to twist right into the family's open wounds.
Section 5. A disastrous marriage. In a desperate, deeply misguided attempt to somehow fix Mohit during a quiet phase where he seemed kinda normal, the family made their most catastrophic mistake yet. They arranged a marriage for him without disclosing a single thing about his severe condition to the bride's family. And the tragedy here is just immense, because the Brahmarakshas completely manipulated the entire situation. It stayed perfectly silent and compliant just long enough to get through the ceremony, meaning the demonic entity was the one who actually took the sacred wedding vows, trapping a completely innocent woman.
The consequences of that secret were immediate and horrific. The terrified new bride suffered physical abuse on her very first night in the house. She started having these recurring, terrifying nightmares of a strange man covered in aluminum plates who kept claiming that he was her true husband. This innocent woman's horrifying experience has now resulted in a bitter divorce and legal case, which vastly expands the circle of destruction caused by the family's secrecy and denial.
Which brings us to the absolute most important question of this entire explainer. We've talked a lot about the Brahmarakshas, the lore, the horrifying symptoms, the whole shebang. But was it just this ancient demon that destroyed this family? Or did the family themselves, through their own actions and inactions, build the door and effectively invite it right in? We really have to look past the supernatural for a second and deeply examine the human element here.
Section 6. The real root cause.
Let's pull back the curtain and look at the real-world lesson hidden inside this terrifying case study. A toxic environment built on parental ego, harsh gender discrimination, where daughters are burdened with responsibility and sons are left completely unmonitored to become volatile, and a total lack of emotional support, all of that shatters a child's psychological and spiritual aura. Think about it. Long before the Brahmarakshas ever stepped foot in that college hostel, Mohit had already been abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect him. He was left entirely defenseless against negative forces, whether you view those forces as literal demons or as profound mental illness.
There's a quote from the source that perfectly encapsulates this tragedy. It says, "If parents cut off communication and let their ego win, they are leaving their child completely abandoned and vulnerable to the darkness." And this hits the nail on the head. This brings us to our core message for today's explainer. Throwing money at a problem or being overly strict does not equal parenting. Your actual presence, your real emotional support, and your capacity for forgiveness as a parent are the ultimate shields against any kind of negativity taking root in your child's life.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. Could a simple, genuine act of forgiveness from a father have saved his son's soul before the darkness ever took root? If that emotional gap hadn't been created in the first place, would the entity have ever found a way in? I want you to think deeply about the relationships in your own life right now. Is your ego creating a space where darkness, resentment, and destruction can thrive? Thank you so much for joining me for this analysis, and remember to look out for the people you love.